We continue on the order paper with public business. The first item of public business is the draft income tax payment of 2019 liability Jersey Amendment Regulations P16 lodged by the Minister for Treasury and Resources. The main responder will be the Chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft income tax payment of 2019 liability Jersey Amendment Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under paragraph 23 of Schedule 5 to the Income Tax Jersey Law 1961.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, in 2020, the states agreed a package of measures to help people financially during the COVID pandemic. Part of that package was the abolition of the prior year basis of paying income tax, which marked a significant modernisation of the tax system. As a result, around 31,000 taxpayers had their 2019 personal tax bills frozen for payment at a later date. The regulations that were adopted by the states provided for generous terms of payment with two broad options. Affected taxpayers have the choice to make regular payments over many years to spread the cost, or they could pay in a lump sum within 12 months of their retirement. In either case, no interest or penalties would apply. Taxpayers also have the option of paying some or all of the bill at any time if they have the means, and there is a payment service available online. Although the indications are that we may be over the worst of the recent high inflation, we are proposing a 2-year postponement to the start and end dates of the payment terms. Without these amending regulations, those who want to make regular payments by instalments would need to start making payments next year, and there would be a 30th September deadline this year for electing how to pay. Ministers are mindful of the continuing cost of living pressures on islanders caused by the recent high inflation and increased interest rates. Adopting these regulations would mean that people who elect for instalments won't have to start making payments until 2027, with the final payment date being pushed back from 2041 to 2043. The Treasury has confirmed that this deferral is manageable in cash flow terms because there is a steady flow of income coming in from those who are already paying up front or as circumstances change. I ask States members to support these amending regulations today, which will provide a little more breathing space for those islanders under financial pressure. Thank you, sir. I make the proposition, sir.
Principle seconded. Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Aye.
Thank you, sir. I must admit that I have serious concerns about this proposition. We are being asked to, once again, delay the repayment of the 2019 tax liability. This, of course, is not the first time that such a volte-face has been proposed, and I am becoming increasingly concerned about the extent of this postponement. It is noted in the proposition that around 3,000 people have already chosen to settle their 2019 tax bill. They ought to be congratulated for their social conscience. But I wonder what those taxpayers will be thinking when they see that yet again the rest of the population who owe money to the tax department are being allowed to defer payment of the monies owed. We have to accept that if this proposition is approved, there will be financial ramifications. Inflation is running at higher levels than was expected when the original liability deferral was brought to this Assembly. Each year that repayment is deferred will decrease the value of those monies due to the inflationary impact. RPI has increased by roughly 30% since 2019, and every year that we continue to prevaricate, we'll see further inflationary rises and therefore less revenue in real terms to the Treasury's coffers. Although the official line from the Treasury is that the proposition is manageable fiscally in cash flow terms, it does not specify how much income will be lost through any further demurral. The crux of the report for me is part 9, which states that the proposition will also provide more time for the successful implementation and resourcing of the payment scheme. This, in my interpretation, means that the Treasury are unable to or unwilling to fulfil the wishes of this Assembly when we voted for the Income Tax Law Amendment number 46, Jersey Law 2021. I believe that this is fiscally imprudent, and I will therefore not be supporting this proposition, and I encourage others to do the same. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputies. Any other member wish to speak on the principles? No member wishes to speak on the principles. I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Sir, thank you. Thank Deputy for his comments. I don't agree that this is any kind of volte-face. We are not changing anything about this arrangement. We are simply deferring payment terms by 2 years. There is otherwise no change. There is no change to the payment terms. There is nothing stopping people paying now if they wish to. And I think the lost income is probably going to be negligible because people do pay. If people leave the island, their debt becomes payable immediately and becomes payable immediately on death. So there will be a flow of people paying income as we go forward. We have payment terms to help people who are struggling. I accept, there will be some help to the IT department, to the IT in Treasury in making sure that it is absolutely ready to deal with this, but that is not the reason for making this. That's a kind of additional benefit, if you like. This is really designed to help individuals who may be struggling to start paying their tax in the next year or two, to give them a little bit more breathing space, and they will then start in 2027. I think that's a reasonable measure that Treasury can make in contribution to helping islanders with the cost of living crisis, as the government has committed to doing in the CSP. So, sir, again, I make the proposition. Thank you.
Maintain the principles. Those members in favour of adopting the appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on the principles of P16. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been, or the principles have been adopted, 39 votes pour, 4 votes contre, no abstentions.
Those members voting contre, Deputies Ayer, Moore, Wilson and Andrews.
Well, does the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel wish to call this matter in? Deputy Miles?
No, thank you, sir.
Very well. How do you wish to deal with the matter in second reading, Minister?
May I propose regulations on block, sir, please?
Are the regulations seconded for second reading? And does any member wish to speak on the regulations or any of them? No member wishes to speak, and I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting the regulations in second reading kindly show. Those against? The regulations are adopted in second reading. Do you propose in third reading, Minister?
Yes, please, sir.
Are they seconded for third reading? Does any member wish to speak in third reading? No member wishes to speak in third reading, then I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting in third reading kindly show. Those against? The regulations are adopted in third reading. Very well. The next item is the States of Jersey Development Company reappointment of a non-executive director, P17, lodged by the Minister for Treasury and Resources. The main responder is the chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion A, to reappoint Carolyn Dwyer as a non-executive director of the States of Jersey Development Company Limited for a further period of up to 3 years, in accordance with the Memorandum and Articles of Association to take effect from the delivery to the company of the notice referred to in paragraph B below. And B, to authorise the greffier of the States, for and on behalf of the States, to deliver a notice to the States of Jersey Development Company Limited in accordance with Article 21B of the Memorandum and Articles of Association to give effect to the appointment.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. So this Assembly approved at our last sitting the appointment of a new chair and a new non-executive director to the board of the States of Jersey Development Company. Those appointments result in a board that is gender balanced and has an equal split between Jersey and non-Jersey resident directors. Today, I stand to recommend to the Assembly a proposition that will see one of the existing non-executive directors reappointed to the SOJDC board. The proposition requests members approve the reappointment of Carolyn Dwyer. Ms Dwyer's biography speaks for itself in terms of the depth of her significant relevant experience. Sir, I do not believe in automatic reappointments simply because someone has served one term. So I will challenge boards what each appointee contributes and will contribute to the board and the company as a whole in future. My officers have looked back at the criteria applied in the recruitment campaign that resulted in Ms Dwyer's original appointment, approved by this Assembly in April 2021. At that time, the SOJDC board were keen to attract a particular skill set when appointing a new non-executive director focused around placemaking and regeneration, a candidate who would bring with them an extensive track record, network and knowledge of best practice, innovation and creativity in this space. Sir, I can advise members that Ms Dwyer's role on the board is very much focused around ESG, particularly on the S, with a high focus on placemaking and social value, something which she is very passionate about. Her background at the built environment in the City of London informs her focus on advocating for public realm and inclusive spaces. She regularly challenges the board to consider the community and how SOJDC can benefit people in both policy setting and strategy discussions, as well as project development decisions. I believe that Ms Dwyer will continue to contribute greatly to the work streams that the company has in progress and future projects. Members will have seen that I have lodged a proposition recommending the approval of new articles for SOJDC, which are consistent with the articles adopted at the last sitting of the Assembly for Andium and indeed the other states-owned entities. The net effect of these new articles would mean that, similar to the other state-owned entities, appointments and reappointments like this will not be required to come to the Assembly going forward. Sir, following the discussion at the last sitting, I can also confirm to members that I have met with the new chair this week and that we will be meeting again probably several times now to really look at the focus of SOJDC going forward, what its remit is, how it's delivering against that remit, and to consider whether it's still appropriate and to bring any potential changes back to the Assembly for consideration. So we have listened to the views of the Assembly last fortnight ago, and we will be taking that forward in a constructive way. So, sir, I make the proposition.
Proposition seconded.
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Those in favour of adopting the proposition kindly show. Those against? Proposition is adopted. The next item is in vitro fertilisation, IVF funding, P20, lodged by Deputy Stevenson. The main responder will be the Minister for Health and Social Services. There is an amendment from the Minister of Health and Social Services. Deputy Stevenson, do you accept that amendment?
No, I don't, sir.
You don't accept that amendment? Very well. Then we will deal with the amendment separately, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to request the Council of Ministers to commit to improving funding for in vitro fertilisation, IVF treatment, removing the current means-tested model and ensuring any new funding model that reflects National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, NICE, clinical guidance, and to ensure that such funding is included within the proposed Government Plan 2025 to 28.
Deputy. Deputy.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to start today in the same way that I started my proposition, and that's with a declaration that I'm a founding governor of the local fertility support charity Tiny Seeds and have lived experience of infertility and IVF. I have no financial interest, however, and made working towards a fairer funding model for IVF part of my manifesto. Sir, it's not that many years ago that women in Jersey who were struggling to get pregnant or who had sadly lost babies were sent to antenatal or maternity for treatment or assessment. They were often left to sit in waiting rooms full of heavily pregnant women, to be asked how far along they were, being treated in labour rooms where they would have given anything to be delivering a baby rather than fighting to get pregnant in the first place. Clearly, this was unacceptable, and I'm pleased to say we have come a long way since then. And a large part of that progress made has been thanks to our very own Constable of St Martin, who worked with others to campaign for Jersey to have its own dedicated assisted reproduction unit. That unit, dubbed the Clinic of Hope, opened in the 1990s and remains the island's dedicated unit for fertility treatment, carrying out some fantastic work and supporting hundreds of patients every year. I feel very privileged to be stood in this assembly today alongside the Conotab, campaigning once again for better, fairer, more appropriate treatment for islanders who need fertility treatment. There is a part of me, however, who finds it quite sad, actually, that it always seems to have been a fight, a battle to get there. Because infertility is a disease, and it affects around 1 in 6 people in our community, and that's a conservative estimate. Some people would put it at more like 1 in 4. It does not discriminate, it affects men and women, and it affects people from all backgrounds. Jersey's unique characteristics and demographics, including a higher maternal age average, means we're perhaps even more impacted by its effects than other jurisdictions. Taking the 1 in 6 figure, that is 8 of us in this assembly, and many more of our family, our friends, our colleagues. That's more than 1,300 of Jersey's civil servants, around 5 children in every class who will go on to be impacted during their lifetime. Even if you don't realise it, it's likely that you know someone going through or has been through it, who has been through it. And we're now at the stage where babies born via IVF are adults living and working in our community. Perhaps they're even starting and having families of their own. Infertility is not a niche subject. It's just one that isn't talked about very often. A bit like mental health, for a long time there's been a stigma associated with the disease and fear and anxiety about talking about it. I first chose to speak publicly about my own experience of secondary infertility in 2020 as part of a campaign via the pages of the JEP seeking to get the assisted reproduction unit reopened following the pandemic lockdowns. Clinics elsewhere had long since reopened, but Jersey was slow to respond and patients were suffering. There was even concern that ARU may be closed down altogether. And once again, it felt like a fight. The many messages, calls, emails and conversations which followed really did surprise me, and they left a lasting impression, but in a hugely positive way. So many of those happy families that I'd seen and envied on Facebook and Instagram and assumed had had it easy when it came to having their children, they had an experience of infertility in some way and had fought their own battles. It really is true that you never know what's going on behind those social media images. There were so many ARU babies out there, many others being longed for, so many people I knew who had experience of IVF, but who I'd never spoken to about it. I suddenly felt far less alone, not quite as weird or like it was all my fault, no longer so isolated. Actually, it left me feeling quite empowered, which brings me on to today. As well as hopefully making a financial difference to patients, I hope that today this debate will go some way to helping those facing fertility struggles feel less alone, more seen, and like we as politicians recognise and acknowledge at least some of what they are going through and the impact it can have on them personally, but also on our community. At its heart, this proposition asks that we recognise that infertility is a disease and that IVF treatment should be offered to those impacted by it in the same way any other healthcare treatment would be offered to islanders. We do not means test any other type of healthcare, so why do we means test for this? Jersey is also believed to be unique in a European context in its means testing for access. So my proposition asks for the current means tested model to be removed. It's currently set at a level so low, household income of £40,795, and bear in mind that most people are couples going through treatment, that there is no record of anyone ever having qualified for it, certainly formally by the health department at least. To put that into perspective, even a couple working full-time for the minimum wage would not qualify for help. That barrier to access should be removed and means testing scrapped altogether. And that is one of my concerns with the amendment, which seeks to change the wording from removing means testing to replacing the system. But I will come back to that later. Instead, I'm asking ministers to come up with a new funding model based on providing funding as per clinically based NICE guidance. That criteria currently states that women up to the age of 40 should be offered 3 full cycles of IVF funded, and women up to the age of 42, 1 cycle. And I say women because although infertility can be a male factor, it is the woman who goes through the majority of the treatment. The health department would then develop its own policies around further access criteria built around that basic provision. So, for example, would it seek to limit access to only those without children already, to those who don't smoke, to those with a BMI below a certain level? That's the approach taken in other places and the one that I propose we agree to today, that the Assembly agrees the basic principle that we follow the current NICE guidance on 3 cycles and 1 cycle, and that the department goes away and works up the finer details as part of the business plan it brings back to the Assembly as part of the government plan process. In an ideal world, we would have no further restrictions on access, but of course that would impact on affordability. So, why should we fund treatment at all? There's a large amount of evidence and facts and figures contained in my report accompanying the proposition, and I don't propose that I'm going to go into it all in detail. However, if members do have specific areas or questions they would like me to provide more detail on in my summing up, please do let me know. Broadly speaking, there are 3 main areas I would ask members to consider today. The first is medical. Infertility is a disease as defined by the World Health Organization, and we should be treating it in the same way we treat other types of health conditions. It also means that as we move forward with building and hopefully in the not too distant future agreeing a sustainable funding model for healthcare, then funding IVF treatment should be factored into the equation. We should not be denying islanders access to treatment because we have a historic problem with how we build and manage health budgets. The right to start a family is enshrined in local and international human rights law, with the Human Rights Jersey Law 2000 stating that men and women of marriageable age have the right to marry and to found a family according to the national laws governing the exercise of this right. Providing fair and equitable access to fertility treatment should be considered in this context. The amendment describes IVF as an expensive procedure. I'd contend that many aspects of healthcare are expensive. Hip replacements cost thousands of pounds, for example. Lifelong diabetes care, significant amounts of money. Every night spent in hospital has a cost attached to it, and so on. At least with this proposal, the ask is clear. It's defined in scope as well as time and provided to a section of the community which otherwise has a relatively low call on the healthcare purse at that point in their lives. It's also aimed at creating future taxpayers. The second consideration is financial. IVF should not be a treatment that only the wealthy can pursue. Yet we know that the current system prevents some islanders from accessing treatment at all, while many others report being forced into debt or having to choose between trying to start to have a family and, say, buying a home. Some have even left or are considering leaving the island for a cheaper way of life which will allow them to fund their treatment, or because they know they can move somewhere with a more generous support system which will help them pay for treatment. I've come across people selling beloved possessions to fund cycles, including their homes. Those forced to have longer than ideal breaks in treatment to be able to save up for their next cycle. And that can be particularly problematic for those whose body clock literally is ticking, as fertility declines with age and even faster after the age of 35. And many, many cases of family and friends clubbing together to help a loved one go for treatment. We saw last week the latest birth rate figures for Jersey drop even further. And a lot of the commentary online made a link with housing, with numerous people suggesting fewer islanders were having children or less children, or more were leaving it later in life because they couldn't afford a family home that had a bedroom for that child. At the very time that islanders want to feel more financially secure and able to provide for a family, our current system is forcing many of those who require IVF treatment into debt. By funding treatment, we could help to ease this burden and give them a helping hand in the right direction. I cite in my report the Tiny Seeds Cost of Living survey undertaken last year, which quite clearly shows the impact of the financial pressures of treatment on islanders. And it highlights the psychological impact that these worries can have too. 96% of respondents said their mental health had been negatively impacted by the cost of living, specifically in relation to their ability to pay for treatment. Fertility treatment on its own takes a toll emotionally on couples. We should be doing all that we can to help ease the burdens which may make this worse, such as financially. And there is also an economic case to consider. Those new figures I referred to that were out last week showed that there were 799 births in Jersey last year, the lowest for a long time, and a 5% drop on the previous year. The island has a total fertility rate of 1.29 between 2021 and 2023, and that's far below the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman, which is required to maintain a stable population. Our general fertility rate was 43, compared to England and Wales, where the rate was 52. Our live births per 1,000 people was also lower than the UK, and the proportion of babies being born to women ages 20 to 29 has declined significantly from 42% to 24% last year. The trends are clear. Jersey has a declining birth rate, a fertility rate below a demographically comparable jurisdiction just across the water, and women are waiting longer to have the children that they do have. Fertility declines with age, and evidence shows that waiting until later in life to start a family can make it harder to conceive and lead to potentially more complicated, and that can also mean costly, pregnancies and deliveries. The latest statistics from that report last week on caesarean sections, and that showed that there were 42% of births between 2021 and 2023 resulted in caesarean section deliveries, compared to 35% in England, is testament to this fact, because there is often a link between maternal age and that type of delivery. At the same time, we know that our population is ageing and that there are significant concerns about whether Jersey will have enough working age people to be able to pay for the demographic bulge working its way through the system. If we are to truly start building a sustainable population, which will not have to rely on mass immigration into the future, we need to start taking these figures seriously and considering what options there may be to addressing the falling birth rate. Providing better funding for IVF treatment so that we can help those islanders who want to become parents but who need help should be part of the response, and seems a very logical and obvious place to start. You could also argue that Jersey has a duty more than most to help fund treatment, given its unique characteristics, which are contributing to the trends, such as the high cost of living, housing costs, the high female labour participation rate, and so on. Finally, in an economic context, we should be considering our responsibility to help encourage today's working age population to see a future in Jersey. I know of a number of people who've left or who are considering leaving the island because of a lack of access to treatment. And some of them are working in professions where we're prioritising recruitment and retention, such as teaching and healthcare. So why am I proposing the NICE guidelines? And in answering this question, it will probably also answer why I have not accepted the amendment which removes the NICE guidelines. NICE are experts in evidence-based practice and value for money, and it's their core purpose to help practitioners and commissioning bodies to get the best care for patients while ensuring value for money for the taxpayer. At its October meeting, the Health Advisory Board heard that the senior leadership team of HCS had agreed to adopt NICE guidance as their default position for clinical guidelines. The minutes from that meeting on the 4th of October state, "This does not mean that NICE was not being used, rather this is now a clear statement that sets expectations." Currently, HCS is not able to provide assurance to the board regarding compliance. However, a piece of work to address this is planned for early next year. A process has been developed for any new guidance that is issued to ensure that it is incorporated into HCS practice. It added that there may be legitimate circumstances where HCS cannot follow NICE, but it was stressed that this must be discussed in an open and transparent way at the board so that the people of Jersey know that they are getting what they should get as dictated by the scientific evidence, and if not, it should be clear as to why they are not. NICE, the board heard, was adopted as HCS clinicians are registered with the General Medical Council and are members of the Royal Colleges in the UK. Jersey is not the NHS, of course, and nor should we want or aspire for it to be, especially given its current challenges. And adopting NICE guidance does not mean that is the intention. Instead, it's about tapping into a valuable resource for evidence-based clinical guidance which balances getting the best care for patients with value for money, and does so in the context of a system which our clinicians recognise and understand given their registrations. That, to me, is exactly what we're trying to achieve here. So why wouldn't we use it? We can also look to other jurisdictions for inspiration and guidance. Fertility Europe's European Atlas of Fertility Treatment Policies is a useful tool in that regard, and it is attached to my report in the appendix. In the last week or so, it's been confirmed that Jersey will be officially featured in the next atlas. Currently, we'd be rated as very poor, alongside countries such as Belarus, Bosnia and Herzegovina, sorry, I should have practiced saying that before I'd said it, Georgia, Switzerland and Turkey. Belgium, Israel and the Netherlands and our near neighbour France all top the atlas and are rated as excellent. Belgium provides funding for 6 cycles. Israel offers nearly unlimited free treatments to any Israeli woman up to the age of 45 until she's had 2 children with her current partner. Basic private insurances cover treatment towards the 3rd and 4th children. The Netherlands also has an insurance-based system covering 3 cycles, while France provides funding for up to 4 cycles of IVF treatment for all women. Because of Jersey's links with these places, I'll also mention Portugal, which funds 3 cycles, and Poland, which recently voted to reinstate government funding for IVF, starting from June, with up to 6 cycles covered. Finally, on the NICE guidance. Updated NICE guidance in relation to fertility treatment is due to be published in May 2025. While it's widely anticipated the new guidance will only improve what's offered to patients, the exact details are unknown. The scoping document for that piece of work indicates this direction of travel and states. As part of the Women's Health Strategy for England, the Department for Health and Social Care has committed to removing non-clinical access criteria for fertility treatment and the requirement for self-funding for initial treatments, particularly in relation to female same-sex couples. My proposition is quite clear that it's asking for the current NICE guidance in place today to be implemented. Any future updates to NICE guidance should be considered by policymakers and the leadership of HCS in due course, as we would expect they do when updates are made across all areas of healthcare. That's particularly important given the default position on NICE being taken by HCS as outlined to the Health Advisory Board. I'm not asking members to agree to guidance which does not yet exist. That would clearly be inappropriate. But reinforcing that clear position now also means that should this proposition be adopted, then a robust business case can be brought forward as part of the government plan process based on a clear position. We don't need to wait for the updated guidance, which is more than a year away, to move forward. Such delays would be unnecessary and could mean patients having treatment delayed even further. Taking action and improving access as soon as possible should be a priority, and adopting the NICE guidance that's in place today enables this to happen. At this point, I would also mention that I want to say thank you, actually, to the previous Health Minister for her time and support and working with me on this in our previous roles in government. I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of different people about this and was really pleased to get to the point that the Minister dedicated resources over the past year. I think the first meeting was, when I look back, was in April last year. So policy officers were working on it, researching, consulting, and then there was a commitment from the previous Minister to bring forward a business case as part of the next government plan. Obviously, things change, which is why I'm here today with this proposition. So turning then to the cost before I then finish. Estimating the potential cost of the new funding model as proposed is not an exact science, as individuals and cycles will each have an element of personal circumstances which could impact the cost. However, estimates can be made. Last year, 68 cycles of IVF were facilitated via the ARU for 51 unique couples. Prior to that, the 10-year average was around 129 cycles per year. Using the cost cited in my report, the funding required would be between £387,000 and £755,000 if all of those cycles were to be funded, which would be unlikely as not all would qualify. The Health Minister's amendment very kindly provides a useful calculation based on the Scottish system, where the NICE guidance is implemented in full. And actually, I think it is probably more appropriate, and I don't mind saying does the best job yet in estimating the potential cost. So by comparing Jersey's population size with Scotland, it estimates that there would be around 87 cycles of IVF eligible for funding in Jersey annually if access criteria were applied which mirrored those in Scotland. On that basis, and using figures again from the Minister's amendment, it's estimated that the increase in funding required would be around £617,744 a year. That's a potential average of £7,100 per full cycle, including frozen embryo transfers. So that's potentially giving people more than one opportunity in a cycle to get pregnant. That works out as £21,300 for 3 full cycles. Split that between a couple over, say, 2 years to allow for the cycles to take place over a reasonable time period, And that's just over £5,000 worth of benefit per person per year. And I, sir, think that it would be worth every single penny. I'm conscious that I've spoken for a long time and thrown a lot of information at members, but I do thank everyone for their time and attention and would just repeat my offer to go into further detail in my closing speech if required. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded? There's an amendment to the proposition lodged by the Minister for Health and Social Services, and I ask the Greffier to read the amendment.
1. After the words funding for in vitro fertilisation IVF treatment, for the word removing, substitute the word replacing. 2. For the words and ensuring any new funding model reflects National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, NICE clinical guidance, and to ensure, substitute the words bringing forward new access criteria that accord with good clinical standards and which have been subject to consultation and ensuring.
Minister.
Sir, I think I should probably start by commending the Deputy for making such a compelling case. However, I think that once further evidence emerges here that members might find that the amendment is yet more compelling, sir. I think we'd all agree that infertility is a disease that causes immense distress. The desire to have a child is a human experience for most people, and whilst treatment is available, it's costly and unaffordable for many. My proposed amendment doesn't deny that. It commits to improving funding for IVF so that more island residents can access the services they need to become parents, mainly free of charge. It also commits to replacing the current means-tested model and to ensuring we provide a service that accords with good clinical standards. But it does not commit to funding an IVF service that accords with NICE guidance before we've developed full access criteria. NICE currently recommends, amongst other matters, that 3 full cycles of IVF should be provided for women aged under 40 and 1 full cycle for women aged between 40 and 42. Scotland funds the NICE recommended number of cycles, whereas in England only 3 of the 42 integrated care boards funds 3 cycles. NICE guidelines are non-binding advice intended to assist the NHS in exercising its duty to deliver services. NHS trusts are not compelled to deliver against those guidelines where they are unable to do so, and that includes on grounds of costs. In Jersey, we've committed to follow NICE guidelines, but that commitment is also non-binding out of necessity. We cannot offer what we cannot afford. As we know, HCS is facing an estimated £18 million shortfall, and I think I should repeat that because that's a very critical element in this debate, an £18 million shortfall. That overspend reflects increased demand for services, coupled with a historic tendency not to cost services properly, or in some cases to implement or extend services with limited funding in place. Given the size of that overspend and the need for better manage costs, I contend that we need to develop full access criteria before making a commitment to deliver up to 3 rounds of IVF for free. We need to be clear about who will get IVF for free, who won't, and why not. Scotland funds up to 3 cycles, but only for couples, whether heterosexual or same-sex. By contrast, some areas of England fund less cycles, but may fund single women. Our assisted reproduction unit currently funds IVF medications for heterosexual and same-sex female couples and fertility preservation medications for people who have had cancer or for transgender people, but it does not fund single women. The decision as to what is or is not funded is custom and practice. It's not a decision of the Assembly or decision of any previous minister. So access criteria matter. If you live in Cumbria, you might get up to 3 cycles of IVF for free, but not if you and your partner has a child from a previous relationship. If you live in Cornwall, you might only get 1 IVF cycle, but you'll be entitled even if you have a child from a previous relationship. Deputy Stevenson acknowledges the importance of these access criteria in her proposition and refers to the role they will play in managing demand for services. It's only right that we are transparent about these criteria up front and that we manage expectations. The proposed amendment also provides that we will replace the current means-tested model, as the income threshold is clearly far too low, but it does not commit to removing the means testing in its entirety. We may, as a low-tax jurisdiction, determine that we need a degree of means testing to manage the impact on the public purse. To be clear, this does not necessarily mean that we will means test, but that we may in some cases, depending on the access criteria that we develop. For example, we could fund 2 IVF cycles for everyone who meets the access criteria, but means test the 3rd cycle. Deputy Stevenson asked us to commit to NICE guidance, but NICE is scheduled to publish new guidance in May 2025. We do not know what the changes will be, but NICE are reviewing the following matters: a potential expansion of the definition of people with health-related fertility problems to include single people, people who are gender transitioning or who have gender transition, and people using a surrogate, in addition to heterosexual couples, people in same-sex relationship, and people preparing for cancer treatment that wish to preserve their fertility. They're also reviewing the procedures used in IVF treatment, including use of procedures which incur additional cost. If we commit to NICE guidance today, we do not know the cost of NICE compliance next year or in future years. And if IVF is not cheap, regardless of whether it's funded by individual people or the public purse. It's sometimes suggested that investing in free IVF will help address declining birth rates, and it will doubtless support more babies to being born in Jersey. And unless it has the perverse effect of people thinking they can start families later due to the IVF safety net. But the overall numbers from that will be small. It's likely that other interventions would be more successful in supporting parents to have more children, or children at an early age, such as investing public monies in affordable childcare and initiatives that tackle cost of living. Deputy Stevens' proposition estimates additional expenditure around £390,000 to £750,000 per year if Jersey funds in accordance with current NICE guidelines. Based on population predictions in Scotland, we estimate approximately £620,000 per year, but both are basic estimates, sir. Deputy Stevenson used historical costings provided by the department, and as a result, they do not factor in the full cost of medications. By contrast, the costs provided in the amendment include medication costs, but are also based on historical data, so may be slightly different to those. Either way, there are many variable factors that make it difficult to accurately predict the potential increase in costs. We know that the percentage of women giving birth aged 35 and older is higher in Jersey than in the UK. If we assume that the same applies to women seeking IVF, we can assume that more women will need more cycles and hence costs will be more. But we do not have the data to predict this accurately, sir. We also don't know how the increase in potential demand will impact departmental overheads, for example, increased staffing related to routine monitoring. We've not had time to model the financial implications fully. In short, we do not know how much money we will spend. That said, my amendment accords with Deputy Stevenson's proposal in that it commits to including increased funding in the 2025 government plan. With the support of the Council of Ministers, I'll be happy to bring forward an amount that should be sufficient to provide IVF in accordance with clear access criteria, once those criteria have been developed. But it must be understood that those costs may not be completely accurate for the reasons stated. If it transpires that demand outstrips additional resources, the Assembly will either need to provide more money, accept rationing of IVF, with or without means testing, a reduction in the number of funded cycles, a tightening of access criteria, or in the alternative, accept that we'll have to reduce or curtail some HCS services. In summary, my proposed amendment supports the need for more funding. It simply asks that we do not commit to NICE guidance when we don't know the future cost of that commitment. Instead, what I'm proposing is the development of a clear access criteria which may include a degree of means testing for some higher earners. The Assembly can then decide whether to accept the funding associated with these criteria as part of the 2025 government plan. So I recommend this amendment to the Assembly. Thank you.
Is the amendment seconded? We now move on to the debate on the amendment. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. And apologies in advance if I'll not just speak about NICE guidance, but I promise to the members that I'll speak once on this debate. It's almost in every portfolio, in every department, there is an elephant in the room. The amendment and the proposition is much wider for me than just IVF. Health, education, economy, finance, everything is anticipating the toll of demographics. The word demographics hasn't been mentioned once in the government common strategic policy. So it's not surprise, and we know that today we've been told by this government and especially Health ministerial team that they don't believe in this strategy. But when we're not thinking strategically about demographics, we don't think the need to fund 3 IVF treatments because it's too much. Maybe we'll have 3 more children and not 1. Everybody shakes heads and saying it's nothing that we can do with the demographic. It's really difficult. It's the trend around the world. We are hearing cost of living, housing, childcare, all this responsible for demographics. And actually these are correct. But they're much more difficult and complex and costly to address. There is something that we can do about demographics. And one, this is the practical tool, IVF. We should be excited that we can potentially have more children born in Jersey and not be reluctantly asking, can we afford it if it costs 600 to 700 to 900? We do need more children in Jersey. We know this. How much is the 35-year-old full-time employer worth to our economy? Substantially, I'm sure that it's much more than cost than IVF. We talked about 5,000 per person a year. Well, actually, it's not our future as the people of this assembly. The children who would be born through IVF in the next few years, some of us maybe will not benefit from our decisions today, unfortunately. A society grows great when old people plant trees in those shade they shall never sit. Greek proverbs. We must make decision now for benefit of Jersey future population and demographics. Now I'll go to the NICE guidelines and standards. I want to be clear. This is not the top golden standard. This is the standard that is acceptable across medical profession. Removing NICE guidance standards from this proposition is something that person who care about highest medical standards will never do. NICE guidelines were created to ensure minimum standards of care. We should aim to go above minimum standards. But I understand how it was described. We will develop our own standards. We'll develop our own way. Actually, to develop our own standards, we'll probably employ consultants that would cost hundreds of thousands. These standards would need to be updated annually, which NICE guidelines do anyway annually that we can consider. As the minister said, that the Scotland and England have different approach, but they still follow the NICE guidelines. We're already struggling with our public trust in our health system. Would members really reflect if we'll all go today and ask residents on the King Street, on Queen Street, on our High Street, what do they think about the quality of care? They will praise doctors, they will praise consultants, they will praise people who are taking care of them, but all of them would, if asked, do they trust? After the rheumatology report, I don't believe that we have much confidence. After recent inquest into baby deaths, which concluded gross failure of basic midwifery care. I'm not sure about the trust. And start to remove NICE guidelines, it's not increasing the trust. It's bringing this trust of the public in our care more down. I'm not sure how this government even thinks to support removing the NICE guidelines is really beyond my understanding. Anyway, I would like more detail on the schedule of treatments that the minister proposing, what the amendment is actually saying. We will do whatever we want. It's just not good enough, Minister, and I would ask to reject the amendment.
Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. I am just standing to note a potential conflict that I have in this subject as as a pecuniary interest, as my wife runs an acupuncture practice and advertises that she specialises in fertility, and any result of this may impact her income. So just to alert the Assembly that I am conflicted.
Very well. You can take, Conrad St Martin.
And I really thank Deputy Stevenson for bringing forward this proposition. She mentioned patients who sat in the maternity unit waiting for a scan. I was one of those patients. I was one of the patients who had infertility treatment in a labour room, and in the next room you could hear a baby being born. That was not conducive to infertility treatment. And that's when I found my voice. And I went off to see Jack Roach, who was the president of public health at the time, and Peter Lambert, who was head of health services, they were amazing. And they said, it's really surprising that you've come here today because nobody else has ever mentioned this. And I said, because it's so intrinsically personal, you do not go around, speaking about this. This was really in the early 90s. It wasn't the Middle Ages. We should not have been sitting in the maternity unit. We should not have been having treatment in the labour ward with babies being born next to us. And a sort of funny aside of that is they asked me what the treatment was like. So I went into uterine insemination and Clomid injections and everything else. And because of what happens with infertility, I had to mention the word sperm. And they nearly had a fit and said that it was almost like, we'll give you whatever you like, as long as you leave this room. Anyway, I've been asked by the Minister for Health and his team whether we can just wait. And sometimes you just need evidence to show people that sometimes, you have waited a long time. So, new charity to campaign for infertile couples. This is March the 7th, 1994. That is 30 years ago. Public health inquest to help couples with infertility problems. That was May 94. We set up a charity. We raised funds because we didn't even have a scanner. We didn't have a scanner for infertile. This is not the Dark Ages. This is the 1990s. So patients actually had to raise money to get scanners. And we kept being told, and we've been told time and time again, just wait, your time will come, your time will come. It hasn't come. Public health inquest to help couples with fertility problems. That's like 1994. And then, I won't bore you with all of them. And then in Friday, 6th of October 2000, there we all are, and open the Clinic of Hope. At the moment, we seem to have, no hope. At that time, we had better treatment in 2000. It started going downhill in 2012 with that government. And the World Health Organization recognises infertility as a disease, but for some reason, Jersey does not seem to want to do that. We are the only medical disease, whatever, who are means tested. Why are we means tested? You don't run somebody over and say, "Oh, sorry, I'm not sure whether we should take you to hospital or not." We just do not means test people. And so the Health and Community Services Advisory Board have already acknowledged that the default position is to follow NICE guidance, yet we seem unable or unwilling to follow through and deliver the funding that should be put into practice. The funding model is outdated and fails to account for the needs of those who would benefit from fertility treatment. And as the Tiny Seeds survey found, couples in Jersey are either being forced into debt or making major financial sacrifices in order to have children, when they, the government, has the capacity to step in and provide support and should treat infertility as a disease as it treats other diseases. Nobody should become indebted to have children. Nobody should have to sell their house or use their hard worked for savings, which were for a deposit for a house, the place where they perhaps dreamed of raising their child, in order to pay for the treatment that will hopefully bring the longed-for child to life. So public health should mean that people are provided with the medical support they need in a safe and healthy environment. Patients with infertility should not be forced into dire financial choices that they currently have to make. As an island with only a satellite clinic means that we have additional costs of travel and accommodation to factor in. Patients should not be punished for this. Approving this proposition without the amendment does not deny the Minister the opportunity to undertake consultation, not at all. The Minister is welcome to seek consultation, as he is with any issue in his remit. But what we have here with this proposition unamended today is the chance to make immediate and overwhelmingly positive reforms to fertility. And I'll repeat that because this has been part of my life now for over 30 years, and it's the chance today to make immediate and overwhelmingly positive reforms to fertility treatment in Jersey, and to show the island that this Assembly is willing and able to take action to resolve a problem that has needed to be resolved for decades. The consultation is to be warmly welcomed if its scope is to secure lasting long-term support for IVF in Jersey, but I do not see consultation yielding a better alternative than what Deputy Stevenson has proposed today. Sir, the proposition before us is about creating a more equal health service. It is about allowing those who want children and need the support the opportunity to actually have children. Our fertility treatment policies lags behind so many jurisdictions, including the United Kingdom and France. We need to make this decision today and vote poor for the proposition and contra for the amendment. Sir, I stand before this Assembly as someone who was diagnosed with infertility and as someone who could not and would not have had children without IVF. I stand here as someone who married in 1996 and because of problems we faced, did not have our son born through IVF until 1996. So when people say, oh, people are waiting longer, I have no intention of waiting longer. It just did not happen. And that happens with so many people. So please stop believing people who say, you know, we're all just waiting. You have to wait a certain amount of time before you're actually even allowed to have the treatment. I stand beside before the Assembly as someone who did not have infertility due to poor lifestyle choices, but as someone who from the day I was born was one of the hundreds, the thousands, the millions of us around the world who would grow up and find that we had blocked fallopian tubes, or we had hormone problems, we had endometriosis, we have low sperm counts, or whatever the diagnosis is. We are a group of people who deserve treatment just as any other person deserves the correct medical interventions. We have the modern technology to perform the correct medical procedures to aid infertile people. And who are we to determine that infertile patients do not have a right to this treatment? We should follow NICE guidelines for 3 cycles. And this is what the proposition is asking for. It's not asking for something that we don't know. The next NICE guidelines are not coming out until May 2025. So, you know, I think Deputy Stevenson is quite clear, and she was clear in her speech that, you know, we'd be looking for 3 cycles. This Assembly would not dream of sitting in judgment of cancer patients or people with diabetes or degenerative heart disease or hip replacements, and so many other medical conditions. So why do we feel we can sit in judgment on a person who finds they cannot conceive or cannot father a child, but who through medical intervention could? Infertility is a ticking time bomb, and time is of the essence. And I think this has been touched on. Infertility appears to be the last taboo and the scapegoat of the medical funding. Modern medicine is always improving, and modern medicine as we all know, enhances people's quality of life, prolongs lives, and improves lives. And modern medicine can help give life to those like me and like Deputy Stevenson, who were born or developed the disease where we need intervention to have children. This amendment is at best well-intentioned, but it is actually ill-conceived. We as an Assembly need to show our compassion, show our understanding, and vote against this amendment. As I said before, I've been involved in raising funds and awareness, longer than some of the people in this Assembly have been living, actually. And my son will be 27 years old this year. And wonderful women who I'd really like to mention, like Fiona and Libby, we're running an infertility support group from at least the mid-1980s. So we're now going back 40 years. That is 40 years ago, and this amendment, in essence, asks us to wait longer. Is 40 years and more not long enough to have waited? We've waited, and enough is enough. Please, I implore you all, do the right thing, reject this amendment, and vote for this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Conor Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. First of all, can I add my voice to those who have congratulated Deputy Stevenson for being a champion for this cause and bringing it to the Assembly in a backbench capacity, but also to the previous speaker who I know has been questioning this for a long time. It's clearly an issue which is important not just for these two members, but for the wider community. I'm going to speak, I suppose, in general terms that I'm happy to support the proposition in its general sense, and I think that's also the position of our party. And we were grateful that Deputy Stevenson was able to come and talk to us. We had a good discussion, I think, with her, and that's, I think, a useful, helpful way to proceed. I do have to put on record that I'm slightly uncomfortable sometimes, not by the way that this debate has been framed, but by sometimes the comments that we may have had already in this debate from other members, but also the way that the argument sometimes framed more widely in the media. We get into questions about the economy, and we're told that actually this is a good idea because we've got a declining birth rate, and so we should be spending money on IVF to try and help the economy, because very quickly I think we can descend into a paradigm where we're thinking of those unborn children simply as another unit in the economy to supplement, call it capitalism or whatever you want to. This debate is very much a human debate. It's about a very human need, I think, that some people feel very strongly. And it's also about how we then cater for that human need in our community, as well as it being, I think, quite rightly, part of a medical need as well that should be provided for. And so the first point, I think, to cover is that I am very comfortable with the argument that we shouldn't be means testing healthcare, that if people need to access all sorts of healthcare, it should be free at the point of access for those who need it. And I was simply going to add that if we pursue the arguments, and there is a time to have an argument and creative thinking about what we do about the future of our economy, and that will be in a completely different context. Because if simply we want to make sure that there are enough people to do the jobs, to pay the taxes, the social security, to pay for the ageing population, we don't need to do it through IVF. we can find other methods, including making sure that people who come to the island who have children in other countries but are not allowed to bring them here, maybe should be allowed to bring them here in the first place. But as I said, so I don't want to digress into an argument about the economy. Where I do differ from the previous speaker, simply in terms of the conclusion that I come to, is that I am hopeful, and I would hope that if need be, some other spokesperson for the Health Department can clarify, is that I see the opportunity to not rigidly follow NICE guidelines in this particular instance as an advantage. First of all, you could argue at a very basic level why Jersey would need to follow the guidance of another country. We don't need to do that. We know that we have a different context in Jersey where we have traditionally, I think in recent years, seen women wait until later on in life to have children. And that is, of course, partly, I think, a function of the high cost of living in Jersey, but also the fact that we have to acknowledge that women shouldn't be seen just as baby-making factories, as I've said, for society. It's up to them to decide at what point, if at all, they want to have children, and to do it when they are comfortable and maybe when they've achieved other things in their lives first. And indeed, men are able to do that and have been doing that for centuries and millennia. So it then brings me to the issue of why having our own guidelines rather than following NICE guidelines might be an advantageous thing. And the first thing to say is that we shouldn't simply be considering this matter purely from a medical clinician-led point of view, whereby we make policy on the basis of most likely technical outcomes. What I mean by that, if that's been phrased slightly clumsily, sir, is that we as parliamentarians, legislators and policymakers need to take in wider considerations. We need to actually look at the philosophical arguments and the ethical arguments that underpin the decision about who accesses IVF treatment and for how long. And there is a paradox, of course, in that we say that in the UK, for example, if you're under 40 and you're a woman, you're allowed to have 3 cycles. But if you're in that bracket of 40 to 42, where, I mean, what kind of message is that sending out? So you're only allowed to have 1 cycle of treatment. And then if you're over 42, because you're clearly past it at 42, you're not allowed to have any treatments on the NHS. Those are the guidelines. Now, I certainly wouldn't want that to be replicated in the Jersey context, because I think the Constable of St Martin already alluded to it. We need to be making sure that actually we cater for all people in our community, bearing in mind, of course, that science does have to play a part in that. And I know that others have given personal accounts today. And I don't have an account to give saying that I'm an IVF baby. I'm not, and I haven't had any IVF children either. But I can say that I'm approaching the age at which my mother, when she gave birth to me, I haven't yet reached her age, if that makes sense. So I'm a 44-year-old man. I'll be 45 this year. And when my mother was my age, she hadn't yet even conceived me, let alone given birth to me. What that says to me is that 45-year-old women, 46-year-old women in the past and presently are able to conceive and give birth if they want to. And sometimes it might be very difficult. Sometimes they just get lucky. And the rest is history in my personal case, sir. And the point is, isn't it the case that surely, statistically, who is more likely to get pregnant? Is it a 40-year-old woman or a 42-year-old woman? It's a 40-year-old woman. That's what the science tells us. Therefore, you would have thought that a 42-year-old woman who's wanting to get IVF treatment will need more cycles, not fewer cycles. So shouldn't it be the case that actually, if you're going to ration the amount of cycles that somebody gets, that you give fewer to the younger women who are going to be more fertile, and that actually the slightly older women might need more cycles? Now, if we were to follow rigidly the advice that are given by clinicians saying that this is going to be a waste of money, if we give treatment to this group of people, we would be bound by that. But I think by not adopting the NICE recommendations, we're going to have the flexibility and the ability to have that debate about what the criteria should look like. Because putting my human rights hat on, sir, you have to also acknowledge the fact that there is a gender discrimination here. If you have a 60-year-old man who is with a 35-year-old partner, he's not going to get discriminated against. He's not going to be told, sorry, we're not going to treat you because you're a 60-year-old man. He can go on, even if the problem is at his end, potentially, so to speak. Got to be careful of that. There's no pun intended here, sir.
Steady as we go.
And I think members get where I'm going with this. So there is an issue here that needs to be considered in the wider piece. And if we also go into the criteria about smokers being refused treatment, and if your BMI is over a certain index, that you're not going to be given access to IVF treatment. Again, hugely problematic from a point of view that may not be done on a discriminatory basis, but it certainly has an effect of being discriminatory. Because we don't say to people in the wider community who are fertile and who are able to conceive otherwise without the help of IVF that they can't have children if they're of a certain body mass index. We don't say if you're a smoker you can't have children. And we don't say that if you're a 46-year-old woman you can't have children. Yet we are seeming to do this. And if we follow the NICE guidance, that we are perpetuating that kind of narrow argumentation that I think is problematic. Maybe not in all countries, because we've heard of some very good examples of other countries. So in summing up, I'd like to say that my reason for supporting this proposition, but also for supporting this amendment from the Minister, is that I would like him to surpass the NICE guidance. I would like him to have a Jersey context-based guidance for this, which actually is more inclusive than what's currently available in the UK, because I think we can do better than what's available in the UK at this present time.
Deputy Balash.
So I attended the briefing organised by Deputy Stevenson, which I must say I found to be extremely illuminating in a number of different ways. I don't think I had appreciated fully the stresses that are associated with IVF treatment. I certainly wasn't aware of all the implications of a very low birth rate of 1.3, which we have in the island, and to some of the causes. A birth rate which is so far below the level for a stable population is a cause for concern. And I agree with Deputy Gardner that it gives rise to a whole series of other issues. The funding of IVF is in a sense immaterial to the central question, which is why are women choosing to start a family much later than in the past, to which there are no doubt a number of answers which go beyond the scope of this debate, but they seem to me nonetheless to be worthy of study in the Health Department. The right to found a family is a fundamental human right, and better funding for IVF is without doubt one of the solutions to this multifaceted problem. So with some reservations, much in the vein of Deputy Tadier, actually, I'm going to support this amendment. I would have liked to have known much more clearly what replace means in the amendment, but I am assuming that it does not necessarily involve removing means testing as an instrument of policy. I don't think that means testing should be removed. The only way in which the Health Department is going to be able to balance its books in the years ahead is by persuading those who can afford to do so to pay more for preserving and looking after their health. So I hope that what the Minister means by replace is doubling at least the threshold for funding IVF to £90,000 or £100,000 a year. No one should be prevented, perhaps this is the principle, no one should be prevented by financial problems from accessing IVF if they wish to do so. As to the precise rules for accessing the funding, I again agree actually with Deputy Tadier that there are a number of complications around that. But I hope that the Minister will develop a policy which is more generous in spirit than that encapsulated in the NICE guidelines. Flexibility is one of the attractions of the Minister's amendment, and I hope that he will take advantage of the flexibility given by his amendment to develop a policy which is characterised by generosity of spirit to those who need it.
Thank you, sir. I first wanted to thank the Conotab of St Martin's for her speech. I was very moved by what she had to say, and it took me a while to go into what I would like to say, because what I did was I listened, and I would like to ask the Assembly to listen to those in this Assembly who have experienced this disease. But it's not that they're talking on behalf of themselves as individuals or as couples, but as we've heard from the Conotab and from Deputy Stevenson, that they are speaking for, they've both been activists, and they're speaking on behalf of many islanders who have experienced this, because they themselves have been part of this activists, part of the community, to try to galvanise support. And we've heard from the Conotab that this has been over 30 years in the making. And so I wanted to remind that, bringing that back into this debate, that here in this amendment by the Minister is asking us to review and not take action, which is funny because this morning we heard all from the government that we don't want to be review, we don't want to do another load of consultations, but we want action. This government wants action. We heard that a lot in answers from this morning, yet somehow in this proposition, because it's not coming from the government, it is coming from a backbencher, suddenly it becomes that whoa, let's take some time to think about it and to gather thoughts and review and get into consultation. Yet here we heard from the Conotab of St Martin's and Deputy Stevenson that they are not just speaking for themselves, but they are speaking for a whole community that have experienced this disease for over 30 years, and they themselves have been activists for many years in bringing this, as they say, taboo, and talking about infertility to our attention, to the island's attention. And so I'd like to ask the Minister, what happens if this amendment passes and the consultation's done, the review's done, and a replacement, and I agree with Deputy Balash, and what do we mean by replacement? We don't know what that means. But what happens if the islanders themselves come back with exactly the same thing as what the Conotab and Deputy Stevenson are proposing in what they're asking for in this proposition? Because they're the ones who've already done the consultation, because they are part of that community and they know that this is important for us as a community to understand that this is actually about social justice, it's about fairness, it's about not people paying out of pocket for a disease that affects 1 in 6 people, as we've heard. And so that is something that I would like to ask the Minister back to understand if at the end of whatever this year, before the next, when he's delaying yet again, what happens if we come to the same proposition that we have confronted with? Will he accept that time? And then I come to the next one about clinical standards, good clinical standards. I'm a bit confused. I don't know really what that means. Does it mean that Jersey is making up its own good clinical standards? Should we not be aiming for best practice and an international scale, or at least like a UK scale? I'm not an expert on this, but I find it a bit disconcerting that we are saying that Jersey will make its own good clinical standards when we also, from this morning and from the last few weeks, have heard that the health department hasn't actually been up to scratch on a number of elements around good clinical standards, and we've seen that in a number of reports that we've seen recently. So how can we trust the health minister in saying that he will be developing Jersey's own good clinical standards if we are unable, at the moment when we're looking back at the evidence that we've just seen and recently come to light, that this doesn't happen in other areas of health. So why would we be confident that it will be happening for this specific area of IVF cycles? And so this is specifically on this amendment. I would like to ask the Assembly to reject this, because I really don't feel that we are listening to the community that is here in front of us. It is not just two individuals within the State Assembly, it is more than that, and they have experienced this for 30 more years, and it's time for action. As the government keeps saying, we need action, not reviews, not delay. We need action. Let's get on with it. Let's have action.
So can I ask a procedural point from the Chair? It may be a point of order, but it's to do with when we come to the vote, do we know if the two amendments will be taken separately?
There's no suggestion that the two parts of the amendment would be, but allow me just to... theoretically, they could be, but I'm not sure if all of them were done as one took them separately. There'd be either removing or replacing, depending upon how that went, and the addition of the words. I think theoretically they could be taken separately, but it's a matter. It's a proposition, so it's a matter entirely for the proposer as to whether they can be taken separately.
So would the Minister give consideration to taking them? I think it'd be helpful for the content of speeches, sir, because that might affect the... I would have probably spoken slightly differently, but...
Well, you've raised it as a point of procedure. I will give it further consideration, but it's been raised, and the Minister knows that that's therefore out there, if I can put it that way. Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. A lot of what I would have said has been brought up by the Connétable St Martin and Deputy Stevenson, and indeed latterly Deputy Jearn. So I really want to confine myself to this issue of clinical standards, and just really to remind the Assembly that we've had two reports recently that are critical of local standards. The 2021 Maternity Services Review pointed to a discordance in care, where policies were open to interpretation and applied differently according to specific members of staff. They actually said differing guidelines from different sources, including the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecology, NICE, and Jersey's own guidance, sometimes conflicted with one another, causing confusion and an inconsistency in the approach taken. In 2022, we saw published the rheumatology report, which again criticised the approach of not following NICE guidelines. They said, whereas there's no formal obligation to follow NICE guidance within the Jersey healthcare system, NICE provides a framework for peer-reviewed practice by which departments can benchmark their performance and clinical activity. It's recommended that the rheumatology department use NICE guidance as part of the governance strategy. I'm finding it very hard to understand why we would set up a system of good clinical standards that are Jersey specific when there is national best practice that is constantly under review. And given the mistakes of the past and the impact that we know it's going to have on the future of patients in Jersey, I would caution against repeating those mistakes, and I would encourage people to reject the amendment and vote for the proposition.
Deputy Barbour.
Thank you, sir. I wish to state, sir, that there is support for IVF as it's very important for people experiencing these types of health-related difficulties. And may I thank Deputy Stevenson for bringing this proposition for debate. Jersey follows in part the National Institute of Clinical Evidence, NICE, algorithm of care, as it provides funding for a couple if a couple's income is less than £42,000 a year, and does fund the cost of IVF medication, approximately £1,000 per cycle. So it's interesting, if we then look at the UK figures as collated of February 24, which follows the same NICE guidelines that we've all been talking about. And NICE recommends that up to 3 cycles of IVF should be offered on the NHS. Interestingly, the integrated care boards only offer 1 cycle or only offer NHS-funded IVF in exceptional circumstances. 1 cycle is 1 fresh transfer and 2 frozen transfers of eggs. Data collated as of this year, which excluded 5 care boards as they're actually under review and there's no data published. I just want to explain what that data showed. Some 54% of those care bodies only provide 1 cycle. 15% of those care bodies provide 2 cycles. And only 8.6 of those care bodies provide 3 cycles. Sadly, to date, Jersey hasn't funded any cycles due to the low threshold for couples to qualify, which I feel isn't right. One could conclude from the recent UK data that the UK isn't following its own NICE guidelines to the full. I don't know why. It may be due to funding issues evidenced by the inconsistencies of delivery across the UK. It's very much a postcode lottery. Whilst the Health Department and government here in Jersey would wish to fully fund everything, we need to state a word of caution in respect to full funding for any specific health need. Sadly, we just don't have a bottomless purse to meet every aspect of healthcare and unable to write a blank cheque. Sir, it's not just the Health Department that needs cash injection from the taxpayer's purse. We need new schools, infrastructure improvements, etc. I could go on. Whilst we just can't fully fund everything, I'm sure the Treasury Minister would say we must exercise caution, look at the evidence, look at good clinical governance and balance our books. However, we do recognise that Jersey does need to provide more support, be more in tune with clinical governance, as our Health Board has indicated, which the amendment, I believe, goes some way to do this, and a willingness to increase funding for this important healthcare need. But we must be able to bring some balance in the round of funding wishes based on evidence, full data, and sustained affordability. Sir, I'm sure members will be aware of the approximate 32 million debt from last year in health, and that we've been advised that there's already a new debt accruing, some 5+ million since the start of this year, with a projected overspend of 18 million at the end of this year. We need to ensure we don't compound this overspend. We live within our means. We're aware that the Health Department officers are working incredibly hard in addressing this, as stated at the recent Health Advisory Board meeting via the Financial Recovery Plan, and we applaud them. Sir, in light of everything stated, the Minister, by way of this amendment, I believe goes some way meeting the Deputy's proposition. I actually put in my speech addressing the current means-tested model. I didn't put replacing. But also about bringing forward new access criteria in accordance and reflection of, with good clinical standards. And didn't want to actually state nice, sir, because maybe we need to look a bit wider. Allow us that flexibility, sir. And obviously we need to have that consultation with interested parties. And such funding to be included within the proposed government plan 25 to 28. Sir, I urge members to support this amendment as set out by the Minister of Health. And thank you, sir, and members for listening. Thank you.
Deputy Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Shortly after the proposition was lodged by Deputy Stevenson, I called her to offer my full support for the proposition, and I'm sure I speak for all ministers, if not the vast majority, that they feel the same way. And I just wanted to reassure members that this amendment is not to delay. In fact, it won't delay the proposition, and I'll explain exactly why it won't. And was born out of just a little bit of concern about perhaps a little bit of ambiguity around the wording. Now, I know that wasn't intention, but if we were to read the proposition as presented by Deputy Stevenson, it says to request the Council of Ministers to commit to improving funding for in vitro fertilisation, IVF treatment, removing the current means-tested model and ensuring any new funding model reflects National Institute for Health and Care Excellence NICE clinical guidelines, and to ensure such funding is included within the proposed government plan. So we read that, so it's potentially meaning that once we'd agreed to follow the NICE guidelines, we followed the NICE guidelines, and if the NICE guidelines changed technically in line with the proposition, our guidelines would change. And we wanted some flexibility in that to ensure what we were going to be doing here with the right size, with the right fit for Jersey. It's a bit, sometimes you can't win, because we often say we don't want to become another NHS. We want to have our own health service, and we want to be able to choose what we do here. And we're in a good position where we can select the good bits of what other jurisdictions do, and we can create our own rules which are right for Jersey. So that's all there is behind the amendment in relation to that. So we're not tied in perpetuity to the NICE guidelines. Now we could say, well, that's okay, but because if those changed and we didn't like the change, we could just decide not to follow them. Well, arguably we'd have to come back and just agree that through the Assembly. If we follow the letter of the proposition. In relation to removing, the difference between removing and replacing, well, again, there was some concern there that we wanted to make sure that the money invested in this went to the people that needed it most. Now, I'm in favour of removing the means testing for this, because in practice, people that are very wealthy will tend not to even think about coming to the state for help. They will go their own private way, and I know many people, friends and family, who have both had help from the states and who have, because of financial means, chosen one of the best clinics in another country around the world and gone straight there at a cost they can afford. But it was just to have the option when we're doing the work to keep a bar in place to make sure that those who can easily afford it don't come onto the scheme. Now that might be a £500,000 barrier. We don't know, but it was just to retain that choice. In relation to timing, I want to reassure members as well, and I give members my word on this, and that this is not to delay. This, the amendment commits to the same timeline as the proposition. That's why we've committed to making sure that any such funding is included within the proposed government plan for 2025 to 2027. That has to be lodged in July. So we have to do the work. We have to put our proposed guidelines in place so we can fund it, so we can get the estimate of funding to be in the government plan. So I wanted to reassure members that this will not cause delay. This is not about delay. There was debate about whether we needed more time, and perhaps we should look at 2026, but we didn't. Council of Ministers decided we wanted to stick to the plan and stick to the timing. So I think we are all in the same place. We're all aiming for the same thing. The Council of Ministers just wanted, and the Health Ministerial team just wanted to make sure we had the ability to fine-tune and put what we felt was best for Jersey in the places alluded to in the amendment. And again, I want to reassure members that we will deliver that in time, the clinical, the guidelines that we propose. And bear in mind, those guidelines we propose, we are free to change and amend and adapt and improve and involve at any time we want without having to refer to the NICE guidelines, and we can have the best of both worlds. Although I think, and I very much hope, the majority of what we bring in will reflect the guidelines in the first instance. So I hope members will support the amendment on the grounds that it seeks to deliver the same thing with some flexibility for Jersey, and I urge members to do that. And again, I thank Deputy Stevenson for bringing the proposition. It's long overdue, and the antiquated, I can only call it, financial means-tested model we had in place was, I think, ill-conceived and left unaddressed for far too long. We can put that right today. Thank you.
Very much. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I know many people, many States members start speeches saying they didn't intend to speak, but I didn't. But I felt compelled to speak after Deputy Shearn's speech, where she asked States members to listen to those with lived experience of infertility. And I feel uncomfortable outing myself as somebody who had difficulty conceiving. But I'd have. And I also have a beautiful great niece, can see through IVF. And anyone who has had a traumatic time will have strong emotions about their experience. Whether or not they have the best solution is always going to be a matter of debate, and I hope that the government's position isn't something to be taken personally by anyone. Government, I'm glad to say, has acknowledged the need for improvement. Of that's very clear. And also, having been present at the Chief Council of Ministers' deliberations, I can assure the Deputy and others in this States Assembly of the sympathy expressed at that meeting. And I also differ from the Chief Minister, just in terms of, I would prefer to see a means testing that excludes the most wealthy so that there is more funding for those who would struggle with affording treatment. But I do believe it's unfair to suggest that this government proposes not to take action. It's clear it's proposing action. And I very much agree with some of the observations that have been made by Deputies Tadier and Deputies Balash, because what is being proposed in this amendment is considered action, and therefore, notwithstanding my own lived experience, I will be supporting this amendment.
Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, sir.
There have been some really excellent speeches today, and many of them have touched, or some of them have touched on the problem of our declining birth rate. And I want to really focus in on this issue and think about why it is happening and why we urgently need to address it. And those actions to address it would include supporting the main proposition today and not the amendment. One of the excellent speeches was Deputy Jean, and she mentioned listening to each other. And that's something I think sometimes gets lost in the debating chamber, is the element of listening. So I hope members will really listen and be prepared to change their minds during this debate. Many members have spoken about some about their own experience of IVF and the joy that their children bring to their lives. And many of us in this chamber do have children, some don't, some do. And those of us who do, of course, we love our children deeply and unreservedly, and they bring immense joy to our lives. And those moments of joy, some of the most rewarding moments in my life, certainly. But to go back to the problem at a societal level, younger women are waking up to the fact that as well as the joy, there is a cost to motherhood. The cost in a financial sense can be over £250,000 per child, probably more, over their lifetimes. There is a cost in terms of time and energy, freedom. If you're a woman, there is a second financial impact in the form of the motherhood penalty, which sees mothers being paid less in the workplace. And I'm also learning, a third financial impact in the form of a pension gap for women, and more to come on that from me later. Now, women who point out the costs or the downsides of reproducing are often demonised because, our society runs on the invisible labour of women in the home, and in particular, mothers. So when this is made visible, it is an inconvenience to some. But, women still overwhelmingly carry the load of household tasks and parenting. Research has shown this is still the case, despite apparent improvements in equality. Although it has improved slightly in recent years, but it is clearly not enough for the younger generations who are realising that they want equity in their relationships. They want to share tasks with a partner. And many are choosing in greater and greater numbers to either just have one child, to have children later, or to not have children at all. And this should be devastating to us, sir. Deputy Tadia pointed out that wanting to have children is a very human, and indeed it's a biological and evolutionary urge. Our children bring meaning and purpose to our lives. I can't imagine life without my child. It's unthinkable, sir. We must enable as many islanders as possible to achieve this joy and help them however we can with things like funded childcare, with equity in relationships, by closing the gender pay gap, and by supporting families more in our community. Birthing and raising children is not a selfish act, sir. It is an act of service to our community. Many of the costs I mentioned are not costs at all, but an investment in the future of our society. We must see the full funding of IVF treatment as an investment. We must support any woman who wants to have a child or more than one child to be able to do so and remove any barriers we can. Make no mistake, sir, this is a barrier, and Deputy Stevenson is giving us the means to remove it, and we must support her today. I think an assistant minister on my right here mentioned the financial problems and overspends, and other ministers have also mentioned this. Those financial problems and overspends are going to get much, much worse if we do not have enough working citizens paying taxes to fund that healthcare. I do not support this amendment, sir. I do support the main proposition.
Very much, Deputy. Deputy Stevens.
Thank you, sir. I'm really grateful to the Minister and his team for recognising in the amendment that there are improvements to be made, and I'm very hopeful that today we can leave this Assembly having made a positive step forward for islanders, and I'm really encouraged by lots of the things that we have heard so far from members today. It's an important recognition for me that the amendment acknowledges that infertility is a disease and states that very clearly. And as I said earlier, I think that the figures that this amendment includes from the Scottish experience, estimating what funding at NICE guidelines could cost Jersey, are really useful and the most helpful yet in putting the potential cost into perspective. However, I'm concerned by the amendment, and I have three main reasons for that. And actually, as the debate has gone on, my concern has grown somewhat actually as well. The first is the attempt to change the wording from my version of removing means testing to the Minister's proposal to replace. And this clearly leaves the door open for some version of means testing to remain in place or to be added at some stage. And this is against the principles I set out in my opening for the main proposition, that we do not means test for any other healthcare and should not for access to publicly funded IVF treatment either. I had written that the Minister's report was silent on the reasons for the proposed change in wording, and I think that it would have been helpful to have some explanation there. But then we've since heard from the Minister in his opening. The sentence started, it doesn't necessarily mean we will have means testing, but it could, and then we will have means testing for higher earners. So I'm taking from that, the door is, it's not just slightly open, it's wide open and we're stepping through it. And my question to the Minister in his summing up would be, what is a higher earner? And where is that means testing going to sit? Secondly, the amendment quite clearly acknowledges that the removal of the NICE guidance is down to cost, that the Minister is not able or willing at this time to commit to funding 3 full cycles. There has been no argument that I have heard today from any of the ministerial team that it's about the NICE guidance itself, or that it's a matter of principle. It's all been focused on cost. And it's all, because I can't think of a better word to describe it, an excuse not to fund 3 cycles. And I think that's something that I say quite plainly like that, because it's important, because we're hearing 2 quite different things from members today. We're hearing a lot from members saying flexibility is great. I'd like to see us have at least the NICE guidance and really deliver for islanders who are suffering here, who need increased help. I think it would be brilliant to have Jersey guidance where we can have that flexibility and we can really deliver for people here. But from the Minister and the Minister's team, his Assistant Minister as well so far, we have quite clearly heard that this comes down to cost and that the offer from the ministerial team that they will come up with will be less than the 3 cycles. I appreciate the nervousness around affordability, particularly in the current climate. But today, I think we really do have an opportunity in this Assembly to make a positive decision to prioritise funding, because it is a choice. We can choose to afford it as an Assembly if we want to, and if we want to make it a priority. That's why this proposition asks ministers to then go away, build a business case, which by using the clear, NICE guidance that's in place today can be the most robust business case that there can be, to then put it into the government plan and then bring it back to this Assembly. And we heard from the Minister about developing the further criteria. Yes, that is exactly what I would expect a Minister and his senior leadership team to go away and do. That's the policy part of it. That's the Minister's job with his team. And actually, it's my belief that those criteria should be policy that the ministerial team or the senior leadership team can amend reasonably quickly if they need to. I don't believe that this Assembly needs to get involved every time there should be a change to that criteria. I believe that we should be agreeing this basic principle, and then the Minister should go away and do his job on behalf of the Assembly to build those and create his policies, and then we hold him to account for those policies. And if we think that they need to be different, we seek to amend them in our own ways. I also believe that we should be spending public money in the most effective way possible, ensuring the best possible outcomes for islanders that we can. And numerous studies have been published which refer to the cumulative effect or power of 3 cycles. And that allows patients multiple chances at pregnancy and allows protocols and approaches to be tweaked and adjusted to ensure the best possible chance of success. Yes, it would be fantastic to start at the beginning and provide one cycle to patients, but that is potentially one opportunity to get it right, one opportunity to try the drugs for the first time and see how your body reacts. One Newcastle study from 2013 showed that of 100 couples who were offered 3 full cycles, the cumulative pregnancy rates per each fresh cycle were 30.1% for one cycle and rising to 50.2% and then 60.2% for the third cycle. They rose again further when frozen embryo transfers were included. By offering 3 cycles, we'd be giving islanders needing IVF treatment roughly a 60% chance of having a child. Some may be successful much earlier, some may require the 3 cycles, and some may require further treatment and go on to have to find their own ways of affording those themselves. And unfortunately, we must acknowledge that there will be some people who won't end up with a child at the end of it. And I think it's important that we take a moment to recognise that as well, because fertility treatment is not a given that it will be successful, and that is an incredibly tough thing for those people to go through. And I would also add that I wouldn't want to see the department opt for, say, funding 1 cycle, but then remove the funding that we've heard that already exists for the medication for cycles to then pay for it. To me, that's effectively moving money around the department rather than investing in a better offering for islanders. And thirdly, I question why the department needs to create more work for itself when the evidence and research has already been done at an international and national level. And I think this bit is really important because we've heard suggestion in the Assembly today that somehow we need to start at the beginning on this locally, but Health's own policy officers have been working on this and consulting on it for over a year. I sat in meetings with them last April. It also included helping to inform the Tiny Seeds cost of living survey that was undertaken last year and which I've referred to in the report. The questions for that were formulated with the help of Health's policy team in order to inform their work. And that's because they recognise that it's a really hard group of people to tap into and get the views of and consult with. So they reached out and we worked together and came up with some questions. Is that going to happen all over again? Health is a huge area and we're all very, very aware of how much there is to do and the pressures that the department is under. Yet it does feel to me here like we're trying to reinvent the wheel, and I question why. Again, back to what Deputy Jearn said earlier, we heard a lot this morning about taking action and not wasting more time on reviews. I take the point. Let's follow it through with this as well. And that refers to bringing forward new access criteria that will accord with good clinical standards. That's exactly what NICE does. So what will be different, apart from the number of cycles offered to islanders? Is it proposed the department's going to start the work all over again? If so, how long is that going to take and what resources will it entail? Because it's not just time and delays, it's about the resources as well. And if not, and the plan is to use the work already undertaken, then why don't we have a clearer set of proposals in front of us today for members to consider? There's no need for further unnecessary delays, especially when it comes to a treatment which for some, every month really does count. I want to stress at this point that my opposition to this amendment, it's not meant to be adversarial. It's based on a firm understanding, following many months and years of research, engagement and consultation, that what I've proposed remains the most appropriate, logical way forward at this stage. It's not a radical proposal. It's not world-leading or groundbreaking, and it's not controversial. The proposal is clear, it's measured, evidence-based, and in line with the agreed default direction on NICE guidance set by the Health Department and noted in October by the Health Advisory Board. And it would make a tangible, transformative even, difference to islanders who require IVF treatment. I really do urge members to reject the amendment and stick with the original wording. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. I won't repeat what we all believe IVF to be or the reasons why it's needed. But one of the things I just wanted to talk about is what this amendment really is trying to do, and that's to introduce rationing into the debate. And it's very familiar to the NHS, both in Scotland and England, and it's used to manage demand and the associated costs of procedures. How many times has it been said in this assembly that our healthcare system is not the NHS? But what I'm querying now is how convenient is it that we're now using the NHS as the basis for not doing something for islanders? There's no two ways about it, but following the science in this area delivers good outcomes for islanders. This amendment does nothing to improve outcomes. In fact, we've actually not heard anything about outcomes for people with fertility problems, other than it continues to limit the opportunity to provide an evidence-based service to those in need. We shouldn't be mixing our messages either to islanders by saying on the one hand that we want you to stay and grow your family here, and on the other hand effectively saying to those with fertility problems, take your problem elsewhere because we can't afford to support you just yet, or worse, we don't want to because we haven't decided what criteria are going to allow you to access the service from. The principle of funding cycles is what is at the heart of the debate. It's nothing more than that. All of the evidence has been done. There is no new evidence coming forward. NICE have actually identified a need to review the evidence, and when it does, I'm sure we will take a look at that. But the issue is now about what we can actually do to support people to access good care under the current arrangements. For members, what might be also helpful to know is that NICE also undertakes its own economic impact appraisal, the results of which are included in their technology appraisals and guidelines. So they've thought about the costs and they've thought about the relationship between this and outcomes, which is why the guidance is written in the way that it is. So we should be thinking more about the benefits and the value of the science and the longer term outcomes, as opposed to just focus on the reason why we shouldn't, on the reasons for cost purposes why we shouldn't do this. And I urge members to reject this amendment and support Deputy Stevens' proposition.
Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I have a slight looking-glass feel about this debate because it seems to me that the arguments that are being brought to support this amendment don't tie up with what the amendment actually does. Everyone seems to be talking about aiming higher, but the amendment is explicitly about aiming lower. It's about excluding, not expanding. And it does make me think of the comment that Deputy Stevenson made, I think early on in her speech, and which was repeated by the Constable of St. Martin. It's still a fight. Yep, it looks like it still is a fight, still. About these basic points. As far as I can see, there would be nothing wrong with adopting Deputy Stevenson's proposition unamended, and then dealing with the issues of access guidelines and the other issues that have been raised as sort of sand in the eyes for reasons why we should not vote for the main proposition, or reason why we should support the amendment. In round numbers, we're talking about £500,000. The amendment is about preserving the option to offer a lesser service than would be the case if the proposition were passed unamended. So there are three things that I want to talk about briefly: means testing, the demographic question, and NICE guidelines. Means testing. So we're not talking about a bottomless pit, the supporters of this amendment have said. Indeed not. But we would not raise the bottomless pit when it comes to other diseases, including other non-life-threatening conditions. I think back to the government plan debate in December, when Deputy Alves proposed free GP consultations for adult students. And there were some very interesting contributions in that. The Deputy Ward said, "I'm very, very, very proud that as a member of Reform we have brought consistently principled, that terrible thing called principles, they really do get in the way sometimes, those principles that we believe people should access healthcare." And Deputy Mazik spelt out what the principle was when he said in his contribution, the principle of free at the point of need, which when it comes to healthcare, there is no finer principle. Yes, free at the point of need. The trouble is this amendment tampers with that principle. Instead of free at the point of need, it says we need to think about whether 3 cycles are actually affordable. Deputy Farnham, in the same debate, had a conversion. He said, a number of years ago, perhaps I would not have supported this. I perhaps would not have supported free buses. I probably would not have supported free GP visits for children. But having seen it and seen the benefit it brings and seen the confidence it restores in this assembly from Ireland has been a revelation as far as I am concerned. So that was a revelation about how these measures, which are relatively small in financial terms, can transform the way in which the Assembly is perceived, the way in which we are perceived, because it's based on simple principles that people can understand. I'm not sure how you can make an argument against Deputy Stevens' proposition, really. We have an amendment which takes us back to penny pinching. The argument is that health is overspent, but that means to deny patients today treatment for the failures of the past. So all healthcare costs money. Any extension of healthcare will cost money. The case for this one has been very persuasively made by Deputy Stevenson, the Constable of St. Martin, and others. We cannot offer what we cannot afford, said one speaker, but I repeat, this is to condemn potential parents for the failings of the past. It's about £500,000. I think we can do it. The question of declining birth rates. I think we should just think this through for a moment. I mean, in terms of our strategic goals, we all accept, I think, that it would be better if there was a higher birth rate. And we're worried about declining birth rates for all the reasons that have been well expressed elsewhere. And the conversation is all about why people are choosing not to have babies or delaying having children because of the cost of living, because of the cost of housing, and so on. But in this case, sir, we have a cohort of people for whom this is not the case. They have chosen to have kids. They want to have kids. They are taking on those costs, those barriers, and they are saying, no, we will actually do this. They're a sure bet in terms of tackling the fertility crisis. So why would we not spend that small amount of money thinking about the long-term gains in terms of our economy, in terms of the well-being of our people, and the fact that they will help us, for sure, contribute. Finally, let me come to the NICE criteria. I do find it very disturbing, I think, that after a long battle to establish the principle that there should be, in this island, adherence to clinical guidelines established on the basis of scientific evidence, that we've fought that battle for so long, and now at almost the very first time that we come up against a small cost argument that challenges our adherence to those guidelines, we're busy talking about the need to step back from them, that they're not appropriate for Jersey, all the other exceptional arguments. I would say we start with the NICE guidelines, then we move upwards. And if we're not going to adopt the NICE guidelines, then as Deputy Stevenson, I think, said, then we should be very clear what clinical reasons are there for not following NICE, what evidence-based reasons. We have guidance of this type because, and we take it from elsewhere, because to a significant extent, these are universal standards. Airline safety is governed by universal standards. We don't say to ourselves, oh, let's have our own set of airline safety standards in Jersey. And that's the reason why we tend to take from elsewhere when it comes to this kind of guidance, because the work has been done elsewhere, it's solid, it's been built on evidence from multiple jurisdictions, and it's encapsulated in the best current form of advice. Deputy Tadia suggested that there were philosophical and ethical arguments against adopting NICE guidelines. I suspect the Constable of St. Martin might suggest that we've plenty of time on ethical guidelines on ethical issues over the years. Deputy Tadia argued that NICE doesn't include good provision for over 45. This is where the looking glass point comes into it for me. The problem with Deputy Tadia's argument is that he is saying that we should have more extensive provision, but the amendment reduces provision. Defeat the amendment and you have wider provision. Vote for the amendment and it's not just over 45s who will lose out, it's those younger people as well who will only have one cycle. The logic doesn't work. We want to have our own health service and our own health guidelines, says the Chief Minister. The trouble is the proposals in this amendment reduce the commitment compared to the UK. It is less good. So we are exercising our right to be different in order to offer worse provision. We're choosing a lesser service, preserving the option of being more stingy than the UK. That's not the kind of freedom to choose of which I feel Jersey should be proud. I think we should reject the amendment.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't going to speak. It was a very good debate. Really good debate, really interesting debate until the last speaker, who seemed to be going for his usual approach of gaslighting. I remind that speaker, sir, that he voted against free GP fees for children, free GP fees for multiple morbidities, and GP fees for full-time students. Now, suddenly, he's bringing an argument, sir, about the cost being very little and the benefits of it. I want to, therefore, sir, as they say, extinguish that gaslight because it's inappropriate. The amendment or the main proposition can be voted for. The amendment does not take on the NICE guidelines for a number of specific reasons, and it's an interesting argument. However, there have been a few arguments that I've heard and listened very intently, actually. I've been sat here, it's just too hot, that's all, to be quite frank. I think I'm just at an age. But I've been listening very intently. So I also, it's very difficult for me to talk about because I've not experienced it. I'm very lucky to have 2 children, and I recognise that, and I fully recognise that. Making judgments about this is really difficult for me. So you look for some data, and when I looked up the NHS sites, and this is a concern, and I'm concerned about voicing this concern because I want to get it in the right way. But so if you look up the success rates in the NHS website, it's 32% for women under 35. I'm not sure if you add percentages together of each cycle, you actually increase that percentage, sir, because each cycle is an independent approach to it, so therefore an independent set of statistics. So I would perhaps question that data. I may be wrong, and if I am, I'm absolutely fine. I hold my hand up. Data is data. You got it wrong or you're right on it, and I'm quite happy with that. But for women over 44, the success rate is 4%. Between 43 and 44, it's 5%. And between 40 and 42 is just 11%. Then that must be horrendous for people going through this. I absolutely understand that. But I wonder whether, and what the amendment says is talking about replacing the current means tested system. And when I sat around the Council of Ministers table and we talked about this, I made clear that my belief, and I see the Deputy
who wanted to gaslight has left. I made clear that my belief that healthcare should be free at the point of access for everybody, quite rightly. And so therefore any replacement would get rid of means testing for me, and I would speak up for that around the Council of Ministers table. If we adopt nice guidelines, it doesn't mean that we can't have means testing if we wanted to introduce it. They are one and the same thing. This government and this assembly could come back and say, we'll adopt the nice guidelines on a number of cycles because they are guidelines. They're not rules, they're guidelines. They are good guidelines, but however, there will be a pot of money. And when that pot of money runs out, what we'll have to do is we'll have to limit it. That would be reasonable. I wouldn't agree with that, because I don't think it's the right thing to do, but that can be done. So if we actually talk about the factual parts of this argument, both the amendment and the main proposition is trying, I believe, to do the same thing, which is to increase the criteria and remove the means testing. But I do, sir, feel that we have to have, and this is where my knowledge is just disappears because of the lack of experience, and I absolutely accept that. In that I don't know how we deal with the provision of the type of IVF services if the likelihood of success is very, very low. I don't know how we deal with that in terms of the criteria that we set. At what point do we say to couples, we really believe that you will not be successful during this process and therefore it is not appropriate for you? I simply don't know how we do that. And that's a genuine point. I'm not judging. It's a genuine point for me. And when I read the amendment, new access criteria that are called with good clinical practices, which have been subject to consultation and ensuring that funding, by the way, the funding is in the same cycle of the government plan, so I'm not sure where the delay has come from. It is in the same cycle of the government plan, so I'm not sure I accept that argument about delay. And I suppose this is about trust. And it is very clear, sir, there are members of the Assembly who simply, whatever this government does, will simply not trust it. We will never win that trust because of what's gone on previously in this Assembly, sir. It's inevitable because it's not been a very pleasant time. But I would say to members is we have to think about what comes out of this. So we can adopt nice guidelines that might change next year, might be less cycles, might be more cycles, that uncertainty that members have talked about, or we can start and look very carefully at our own criteria and come back and debate those criteria here. And so, quite simply, I have absolutely no idea what is the best thing to do in terms of number of cycles, because I have no clinical expertise in this, I have no experience of this. But I'm quite willing, sir, to replace the means tested system, because I don't think that's the right thing to do. But we need some really good clinical guidelines, given the percentages around success. I don't know if it's false hope that I'm talking about. I don't know if it's saying to numbers of couples, you will have access to this, there you go. I don't know how this fits, but we need some sort of criteria in there that protects, I think, couples from unexpected, impossible outcomes. Plus, and this is something I have read about in the last few weeks and months, and we discussed with Deputy Stevenson between us. It was really nice, really good discussion actually, much better than, well, one of the speeches was just slightly vexed me, but I'll get over it, I'm grown up. It was a very good discussion, and I thank you for that. The toll that IVF takes must not be ignored. Physical toll of IVF in terms of on the body, and we have to think very, very careful about what that toll is and what we're funding. So I could, if the amendment wins, I will support it. If it loses, I will support the main amendment because I think they are more similar than I think we're looking here. And I understand the lack of trust in the wording of the amendment and where that may come from, but I would hope that we could have a more constructive approach to it in this Assembly around this topic, because I think we all want the same thing, which is give the best access to people we can possibly give. However, so I will say I don't think it's a problem to our demographic shift. The problems with people not having children is not simply IVF, that is one proportion of that, but the real problems are income inequality, expensive housing, low wages and inequality in our society. They have to be addressed if we're going to restore what we want, which is our population and a particular demographic of our population. So I am minded at the moment to support the amendment, sir, but I also, if it doesn't win, I would support the main proposition. And I hope that speakers can be hopefully as positive and not have the gaslighting. I was going to do my joke, sir. How many narcissists to change a light bulb? None, sir, because they use gaslighting. Thank you very much.
When you say you were going to do your joke and then you did it, I'm not entirely sure.
It's a comedy technique, sir. I learned it off of somebody.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak on Deputy Luce?
Thank you, sir. So in the past, members would have heard me speak about how fortunate I feel to live on this island. And when I was first married, my late wife and I lived in a very small bungalow with 1.5 bedrooms and had our first child. Just before our second child was born, I moved farms and took on the tenancy of a large farmhouse in St Martin where we had 6 bedrooms. And we joked that we'd have some more kids, and when we thought we had enough, we'd stop and count how many we'd got to. And we ended up with 4 wonderful children. And I'll stop making jokes there because this is a more serious debate than that. But so in those early days of our late 20s and early 30s, we never considered or thought about the difficulties and challenges of having children. It was just something that happened naturally. As we got older, one understands more about the pain and anguish of dealing with a miscarriage, or worse still, multiple miscarriages. And then, even worse, the difficulties and challenges, the awfulness of not being able to conceive, and the anguish that those parents and males and females feel of not being able to carry on their lives. I hate talking about health and money at the same time, sir, and so I find this next bit difficult, but I did sit up and I hadn't meant to speak in this debate, but Constable of St Martin said that we don't sit in judgment on cancer patients. Started me thinking, and I just want to say this to members of the Assembly today. We need to be just careful to consider, and I don't particularly want to talk about cancer here, but we do need to consider what might happen, depending which way we vote in this debate. Because if money is not a problem, that's fine, but we know it is. And if we say to the Health Minister, this additional funding of £500,000 or considerably more, that it could be, if we could vote for the unamended proposition, it could be considerably more. Where are you going to make the cuts? Are you going to make the cuts on eating disorders or mental health, both really taking off in our young people these days since COVID, or diabetes, another health issue coming down the tracks at us, great numbers, or cancer itself? Where do you take that funding from, Health Minister? But maybe we will say, no, Health Minister, your budget's ring-fenced. We can take it from some other departments. So maybe out of schools and education, or nursery provision, or 1,001 days, which we need to get back to. Police on the beat, or supporting the elderly. The Minister in his amendment has accepted, and I think we all accept, let's cut the means testing for this infertility issue. We need to do that. We need to get more people on the infertility treatment. But when it comes to the potential for a considerable increase in the funding for IVF, unlimited potentially funding for those in their 40s, late 40s, where it's so unfortunate, but the chances of them succeeding with IVF reduces to almost zero. We must give the Minister some discretion. So I would say to members, yes, obviously, cut out the means testing, but please seriously consider voting for the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
So, I'd just like to ask if members would be kind enough to bear with me. I'd like to answer address some of the points that have been made, but I have very messy handwriting and I've got notes everywhere, so I might just take a little bit of time to order my thoughts. Firstly, I'd like to thank all members for their contributions. It has been an interesting debate, extremely interesting. Deputy Stevenson said this isn't about funding, it's just excuses. I think I'm right in saying that. I'm afraid to say that for me, it is all about money and precious little else, to be honest with you, because I've got to say that I wasn't paying lip service when I said that I found the arguments extremely compelling. They are compelling, sir, and I'd love to be able to support the proposition unamended, and it certainly might help to make me a little bit less unpopular than I appear to be because of this amendment. However, I just remind members that someone has to assume the difficult job of providing a full range of health service based on a budget that is defined by this Assembly. And I would just remind members, because an awful lot of former ministers have spoken against this amendment, and yet the budget that health has was actually approved by this Assembly and proposed by them. And I find it amazing how quickly ex-ministers or former ministers have forgotten that 2 and 2 don't make 5. So they only make 4. And I'd refer people to, I don't know if anybody's listening to Radio Jersey this morning, somebody drew it to my attention, so I listened to it, and it was quoting me from a scrutiny meeting where I had the unfortunate job of saying that we didn't have the £1 million that we needed for the mental health strategy. I noted that Councillor St Martins did refer to people on IVF being scapegoats, and once again I have great sympathy, but we also have people over here with serious mental illness, and we haven't been able to put that £1 million for them either, sir. I'd remind members that we are running a running deficit for this year of £18 million. Now, people have spoken very passionately about the need for 3 free treatments, but not one single person that's spoken against the amendment has told me or suggested to me where the money might be coming from. And that makes my life a little bit difficult, sir. And I've got to say, on the business of means testing, I'm not sure how comfortable I am with someone on low income paying extra taxes, because that's what's going to be required, to fund 3 cycles of IVF for somebody who's come over here as a 2-1E. I don't know why that doesn't sit terribly comfortably with me, sir. I will confirm that there won't be any delay. If the amendment passes, we'll move as quickly as we can. And I would ask people not to be frightened of this amendment, because it's realistic, sir. I think I'll finish by saying that I will be coming back to the Assembly at some point with proposals for increased funding for health. And if we decide to introduce some form of extra taxes for health, because I really think that's where we're going to have to go, only then will we be able to deliver all of the things that we actually want, be that mental health and as much IVF as people need, sir. So I think on that sobering note, I would just ask members to support the amendment, sir, because it makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
So may I ask the Minister if he'll take the amendment separately?
No, I think that the idea was to run it as one, and I'd rather it was taken as one, if that's okay.
Do you call for the appel? Do you call for the appel, Minister? No?
Yes, sir, of course.
Yes. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the Minister's amendment to P20. Members have returned to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. And I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been adopted. 28 votes pour, 15 votes contre, 3 abstentions.
May I have them all, please, sir?
Yes.
Those members voting pour, the Connétable St Helier, St Lawrence, St Brelard, Trinity, St John and St Mary, in Deputy Southern, Labby, Luce, Morel, Lahegre, Ayer, Bob Ward, Owls, Gorst, Barnum, Mesick, Balash, Scott, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Rose Binet, Miller, Howe, Tom Binet, Ferry, Barbara Ward and Andrews. Those members voting contre, the Connétable of St Martin, St Clement, Grouville, St Juan and St Saviour, and Deputies Dublé, Gardner, Moore, War, Miles, Renouf, Jearn, Alex Curtis, Wilson and Stevenson, and those members abstaining, Deputies Tadier, Coles and Kovac.
Very well, we now return to the main proposition as amended. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No member wishes to speak on the proposition? Those in favour of adopting the proposition as amended, kindly show. The appel is called for. The vote is on the main proposition as amended. Ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted. 44 votes pour, 2 votes contre, 1 abstention. 2 and 1.
Those members voting contre, Deputy Wilson and Deputy Coles abstained.
Very well. I beg your pardon, there was just 1 contre. I must have misread it. I apologise. Very well. The public business for today is concluded, and I invite the Chair of PPC to propose the arrangements of public business for future meetings.
Thank you, sir. The arrangement of public business. Our next sitting is on the 21st of May. There have been no lodgings since the consolidated order paper was published. However, we have 6 items listed. P21, Common Strategic Policy. P13, Pay Gap Reporting with amendments. P15, Channel Islands Lottery Distribution of Proceeds. P18, Assisted Dying. P23, Reappointment of Jersey Consumer Council Chair. Bearing in mind that we have the assisted dying debate, we should be prepared to sit for at least 3 days and maybe 4 days. Sir, I make the proposition.
Very well. Members agree to take the order of public business at forthcoming meetings as proposed by the Chair of PPC. Very well. That concludes the business of the Assembly, and the Assembly stands adjourned until 10:30 on Thursday the 9th of May, where there's a special meeting to commemorate the liberation of the island.